consider okay, honey? I really don't think there's a different delay for Yontif, okay, honey?
Okay, okay,
All right?
that's okay,
What?
that's fine. Interesting clue. Village in South Africa. Village mainly in South Africa.
So there is a name for villages in South Africa, okay? There's a word for it. I'm forgetting what it is, okay?
Oh, I thought they wanted a specific village.
No, okay? All right,
Mhm.
4 or 5 letters. Four.
Starting with D and ending with P.
Okay, good evening to all those who are joining through Zoom. Just give me a thumbs up that you can hear. Awesome. Okay. Let's see. Okay, for those that are in Zoom land, I'm going to, I shared the screen already. I'm also going to put the source sheet in the chat so that you can scroll at your own convenience and not wait for me if I get behind a bit. Okay. Let's see. Here. Thank you. Okay, I don't bite that hard. Welcome to the Lisses. There are some source sheets on the table right behind Josh over there. Okay, it's great to be together and to start getting ready for the Amim Noraim through a bit of a tour of a prominent tefillah in the Machzor, and also in our everyday Sidur. Aleinu is a tefillah that's very familiar to all of us, and yet the history of it is very foggy. And tonight we're going to explore some of those shaky origin stories. We're going to look at 3 of them, and then we'll see how far we can get in terms of how the tefillah migrated from the Rosh Hashanah Machzor to the conclusion of Shacharit, Mincha, and Mariv. I think it's probably the most frequent tefillah that we say, besides maybe, I mean, it's probably on par with Shemona Esrei, if we think about saying it 3 times a day. With Shema, you know, we really say Shema twice, maybe 3 times a day if you include Kriyat Shema al Hamita. You know, Ashrei we say twice a day, or I guess 3 times a day if you include Mincha. What tefillah do we say more often than Aleinu? I guess Kaddish, right? We repeat Kaddish several times. That's probably a front runner. Anything else? I'm just thinking out loud here. I think Aleinu might be a solid second place in terms of frequency when it comes to tefillot. And so the question is, like, where did it start and how did it get there? You know, one of the themes for this upcoming year is going to be tefillah, and not just because we got new Sidurim, the RCA Sidurim, which gives an opportunity to think about why we chose that, some of the new commentaries, translations, formats, etc. But we're also going to be focusing on the history of the Sidur between Mincha and Mariv on Shabbat afternoon. And I think it's also, if I'm reading sort of the climate accurately, there is a sense of need. I sense a need to do some iyun tefillah, to do some drilling into tefillah, to have not just the awareness that we're standing before God, but that we should know why we're saying what we're saying when we're saying it. And it's not just the same words, the same place, the same time with the same people every day. I just came back from a trip out west with the Ezra Schwartz Memorial Run, and my davening was outstanding in Yellowstone. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to confess this, but here I am. Like, when I was standing in front of these majestic mountains, I felt like it was an interruption to daven, because I was already davening. With every step I was taking, I felt so connected. And so it sort of brought up some of these questions for me about organized communal prayer, and the shift that took place with the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, in which Chazal felt the need to institutionalize and formalize prayer. And it's a great structure and routine, but sometimes I think it can get in the way of actual davening. So that's a long introduction to why I'm hoping to focus a lot on tefillah this upcoming year, and Aleinu as one of the front runners, or in terms of the frequencies, where I want to start. So the opening question is, how did it end up being the concluding tefillah 3 times a day? There's actually only 2 tefillot that a year where it's not the concluding tefillah for. It's a good trivia.
Mhm.
So that's actually a good point. Tisha B'Av, we say Aleinu at the end of Tisha B'Av? We do say Aleinu at the end of Tisha B'Av, but Yom Kippur, both for Musaf and for Mincha, there is no Aleinu. So we end up on Yom Kippur of all days, only saying it twice after, or actually only after Maariv. But we say it multiple times during the Avoda. So Aleinu has its origins in really before the conclusion of our tefillot in the Machzor for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The earliest time that we see it is in the Machzor Vitri, which is compiled by Rashi's student in the 12th century. That's where we see it in full formation as a conclusion to Tefillah. But we see it much earlier than that in the times of the Gaonim during the Rosh Hashanah Musaf. It serves as the introduction to which of the three sections? Malchiyot. Good. Okay. So we know that in Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, there are three sections, the Shofrot, Zichronot, and the Malchiyot, each of which has a preamble of 10 psukim, 3 coming from the Torah, 3 from the Nevi'im, and 3 from the Ketuvim, and then 1 again from the Torah to make 10. And the intro to Malchiyot is the first paragraph of Aleinu. So the question that I really want to drive forward is, how did it get from that origin to the conclusion of all 3 of our tefillot, at least 364 days a year? So in order to answer that question, I want to dig into authorship. Who wrote Aleinu L'Shabeach? And so just to forecast for a second, we're going to this week hopefully talk about authorship and institution, if you look at the outline here. And then next week, talk a bit about the controversies like the censorship and some of the language that might have shifted over the years, and then also the meaning and the purpose of the words. Okay, so we'll go through it really line by line next week to appreciate where each line comes from and how together it constructs a particular message, both in the first paragraph and the second paragraph. Okay, so has anyone heard about where Aleinu came from in terms of who wrote it, who the author is? Yeah.
I heard it, the Rav.
Okay, great. So so Josh here said Yehoshua, which is one of the theories that is very shaky, but we're going to see all the theories are equally shaky. And Janice shared that it was the Amora of Rav from the 4th century. So those are 2 of the possibilities. As you can see on the sort of source sheet here, the authorship has them going sort of in most recent to oldest, right? Rav, the Amora, who lived in the 300s after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Rabbi Akiva is the second potential author of Aleinu L'Shabeach, and he lived during the time of the Beit HaMikdash and its destruction. So that's sort of Mishnah-itic times. And then, as your namesake, Josh pointed out, Yehoshua is potentially the author of this tefillah. So let's analyze these 3 possibilities, and we'll see how there is perhaps a bit of a support for each one, but ultimately none of them are on solid ground. Okay, so the first source is taken from the Yerushalmi in a statement about Rav. So this is in the second source here. Amar Rabbi Yossi Berebi Bun. This is relating to a conversation about when the world was created. Was it created in Nisan? Was it created in Tishrei? So Man Savar Berosh Hashana Nivra Ha'olam. So he was the one who said that the world was actually created in Tishrei on Rosh Hashanah. And who was that? That was Rav. So Ditani, as it was said or taught, Bitkiata de Beirav, in the composition around blowing the shofar in the house of Rav. Zehayom tchilat ma'asecha zikaron leyom rishon havi berosh Hashanah nivra ha'olam. So this is the day of the beginning of your works, remembering that first day, and that implies that the day of Rosh Hashanah, the world was created. And so here, the Rishonim on Ditani B'Tikiyata de Beirav explain that this is referring to the three brachot of Musaf on Rosh Hashanah, that Rav composed the middle sections of Musaf, and in that there is the mentioning of Rosh Hashanah being the day that the world was created, as being a proof for that being his school of thought. So from here, it's possible to say that if Rav was the author of the Shmona Esrei of Musaf for Rosh Hashanah, and we know that the introduction to Malchiot already in the time of the Gaonim is recorded as being the Aleinu, that perhaps Rav was the original author. So Josh is, shaking his head. It's very, more than a little. But I will say that if you open up a Birnbaum Machzer that we have and use still to this day, and the Birnbaum is known for writing who authored each of the tefillot, the Birnbaum, based on this source, says that Rav is the author of Aleinu. Okay, so it might be speculative, but it also might be the best, that we have in terms of the most sort of recent potential author of. But it hinges on this, the Tani B'Tikiyata de Beirav, that this was taught in the compositions that Rav made about Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so again, it's loose, but it's possible. Okay. Okay. So let's move on to the second one. So the second possibility is that Aleinu originates in mystical texts, in what's called the Hechalot literature, which is a body of literature that provides guidance for personal communion with Hashem, sort of hearkening back to the metaphysical experiences of the prophets of Yeshayahu and Zechariah, in their sort of transcendent experiences. So let's take a look at where we see Aleinu in this literature. So first, in terms of just a text that we're familiar with, the Tur, and source number 3, I'll read in Hebrew and then translate into English, where he's talking about the laws of tefillah. He says, "V'omer aleinu l'shabeach, u'kishiyagia el kochol hamonam yafsik ma'at kodem shemar v'anachnu korem mishtachavim." So you're supposed to pause slightly before you get to the words v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim, that we bend and bow, kidei shelo yehei nireh kilo chozer alamala, so that it doesn't seem like you're going back to the beginning. V'yesh omrim v'kisei kevodo b'shamayim ima'al ve'en lamar kein elu Moshe v'yikaro. So there's some difference in the girsaot, in the text, in terms of what should be said. V'chein hu hanusach, and this is the text, the Sefer Hechalot, in the work of the Hechalot, which again, as I mentioned, is a body of literature that we would call it sort of Kabbalistic literature. V'niftarin l'bateim l'shalom. And after saying Aleinu, that would be the end of davening, and people would go home happy. Okay, so we see here referenced that there's this nusach in the Hechalot literature. So I tracked down this reference in the Hechalot literature, which Gershon Shalom, who was a great collector and translator of the Hechalot literature, has in his work on Gnosticism, and it's in the Maaseh or Merkava. I think it's Maaseh Merkava, which is again a reference to the chariot of Yeshayahu in section 4 through 5. And here there is a conversation between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva about how to experience transcendence, how to connect beyond ourselves to Hashem. And so let's read it inside, and we'll see what the answer is. So, Amar Rabbi Yishmael, Heich yachol letzapot behen v'lachzot ma oseh rizuyei Yaveh Elokei Israel. So, how are we supposed to wait and yearn for, and then to see what the secrets of God, of the Jewish God is? So Amar li Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Yishmael is asking him, like, how were you able to survive an experience with God? So what might Rabbi Yishmael be asking Rabbi Akiva about? Which mystical experience did Rabbi Akiva uniquely survive?
Pardes.
The Pardes. Good. So when he entered into this sort of mystical domain, and we know that there were different consequences of that, Rabbi Akiva was the only one that emerged unscathed. And so Rabbi Yishmael might be asking him here, like, so what's the secret? We want to know, right? Elisha ben Abuya went crazy. Others became Elisha became a heretic. Others went crazy, and Rabbi Akiva remained fine. So Amar Rabbi Akiva, Amar li Rabbi Akiva, Tfilat Rachamim hitpalalti va'yedei kach chotzalti. So he said, I prayed the special tefillah of Rachamim, and that's how I got saved. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Kevan shitpalalti at tefillah hazu reiti 604,000 ribo malachei kavod. When I said this prayer, I saw 640,000 angels she'omdim keneged kisei kavod, that were standing in front of the throne of honor. Reiti tefillin al gidudei Yaveh Elokei Israel v'natati shevach al kol avrei. And I saw God, standing there with the tefillin on, and I gave praise. And what was the praise that I gave? We turn. So this is what I said. Alai l'shabeach la'adon hakol latet gidula liyotzer breshit. Sound familiar? So what do we notice already? What's the difference between this and what we say? Yeah, right. Swellen pointed it right out. We say Aleinu. This is all right. A lie. This is the personal. I am praising the master of the universe to give greatness to the creator of creation, right? So for Rabbi Akiva, it was a personal experience, and we collectivize it. We make it plural. We make it a we, right? That it is upon us. Aleinu. It is on us to praise Hashem. So that's one difference that we'll note. And as we read through the rest of this, we'll do a bit of comparison. We could spend the entire class just comparing the two Girsaot, which would be a fascinating exercise in its own right, but maybe we'll come back to that next week when we talk about the themes and messages of Aleinu. But for now, we're sort of just focusing on the authorship. So let's see how close, this version is to what we have to see if this might be the origin of Aleinu. Right, so so far checks out, right? Shalosam chalki, so we're back to the consistent first person. Bahemba gorali, stem b'chol hamanam shehem mishtachavim lehav avarik umitpalim el elo Yoshia. Okay, that they pray, that they bow to vanity and emptiness. And pray to a God who doesn't save them. But I pray to the real King of Kings. He established the world and set the foundation of the universe. Okay. Okay, so we see that there's a lot of similarity here to what we do with Aleinu. For me, when I say the Aleinu I'm familiar with, I have to do the tune. And we're going to come back actually to that tune, and the origins of that tune has actually a very fascinating origin to it. But so far, it seems to check out mostly, right? We have to think a bit more about this line of Shehem Mishtachavim Lehava Variku Mitpalim El Yoshia, which itself has a fascinating history, right? Do we say that? Do we sing that? Right? There's yeses and nos, right? When the Koran first published their Siddur in 2009, it was they put it back into the Siddur. It had been absent from almost every single medieval manuscript. But once once Israel started printing their own Siddurim, they put it back because it was obviously something that was censored, right? But because so many people hadn't been saying it, Koran, put it in parentheses in their second edition because there was this discomfort in in saying it. The Art Scroll also doesn't have it. They have it in a gray box or in parentheses because it's really about dismissing the other and putting down other faiths, right? And that was a critical part of why it became so important, which is why we're going to come back to it in terms of how it spread. But before we get there, I just want to complete this source to appreciate the similarity and differences between our Aleinu and this text. Right, so we were reading V'yosed haaretz u'shchinat zovegam Elokeinu ein od emet malkeinu epes l'atcha Hashem Elokim Hashem Elokim Hashem Elokim hu echad u'shmo echad Hashem Elokeinu Hashem echad Hashem Hashem l'rachum v'chanan arech hapayim echad v'yemet. Okay, so we took a little bit of a left turn. Okay, we had been pretty consistent now on theme with Aleinu being about God's majesty and the uniqueness of our faith in comparison to other faiths. And now in this version, we are saying Hashem hu Elokim, Hashem Elokim. Where does that come from? So it comes from the end of Ne'ilah, right? And before then, it came from Eliyahu and Har Carmel, right? So again, Eliyahu has a lot of mystical resonances, and so it would make sense that Hechalot literature would be quoting Eliyahu. And then there's sort of this allegiance of almost like this Shema, Hu Echad U'Shmo Echad, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and then the Yud Gimel Midot of Hashem Hashem Kol Rachum B'Chanan Arech Hapayim Chesed V'Emet. So the packaging of Aleinu in the Hechalot literature is more about the immediacy between the prayer, the person praying, and God, because that's what Hechalot literature was about. It was about a guide or guidance to experiencing God directly, right? Not through a medium, but having sort of a multi-sensory prophetic experience with God. So, so this sort of second approach in terms of the authorship would have you believe that Rabbi Akiva was the author of Aleinu. Maybe he even said this when he was in the Pardes, and it continued from that point onwards. Now, there is great academic debate about when and who the Heichalot literature were written and written by. Some say that the Heichalot literature, Rav Meir Bar Ilan from Bar Ilan University believes that the Hebrew of the Heichalot literature indicates that it was written in the times of the Mishnah, meaning that Rabbi Akiva could indeed have been the author of it. Others contend that it was post-Talmudic, and that in order to gain credibility, it was put into the mouths of the Tanaim. Because we know the older a source is, the more authentic it is, right? Not always true, but oftentimes it at least carries more gravitas when it has an older sort of hook in our history. So it could be that this is post-Talmudic, but if we want to entertain the possibility that it is Mishnaitic, then Rabbi Akiva could be the Mechaber. He could be the author of Aleinu, even though it sort of morphed a little bit from its form here in the Heichalot literature to what we have today. Okay, and now we are going to get to the third approach, which we'll do quickly. And this is from the Kolbo, who is really quoting from Rav Hai Gaon, who said, Vishamati, this is in source number 5, Vishamati Yehoshua tiknu Visha'a shekava shiricho v'chatambo sham katnuto lemafreya. So I heard, that Yehoshua, the Misharet Moshe, the servant of Moshe, was the author of Aleinu. And when did he write it? Right after he conquered Yericho and was putting down sort of their, religious beliefs versus our preeminent religious, beliefs. And how do we know that this was him? There's proof, because he inserted his name backwards. Aleinu is our ayin for Aleinu, the shin in Shiloh, the vav in the Vanachnu Korim, and the hey in Hu Elokeinu. Now, each of those is far apart from each other. It's not like they are even, in one sentence. And so it's a little bit like comical that that's like, the way that he secretly signed his name and embedded, his authorship. You see, in the corner of paintings, that the artist, puts his or her name quite, dramatically so that it can be seen by all. This is sort of a very curious, way of seeing Yehoshua as the Mechaber. And another reason why this is challenging is that many of the psukim in Aleinu are taken from books like Yeshayahu and Yechezkel, which took place historically long after Yehoshua was alive. So I think this, has very little, basis, but nevertheless, it's written in the Art Scroll Siddur, and you had heard the theory before, right? There is some context in terms of celebrating the war against Yericho, where Yehoshua, did say a tefillah, and perhaps there was over. Yeah, indeed. Okay, so that perhaps there's a link there, but there's not much more to go off than this source. So we'll sort of note it without sort of hanging our hats on it. So now that we've scratched the surface a bit about the authorship, I want to try and suggest a theory for how it migrated from the Rosh Hashanah Machzor to the conclusion of our tefillot for Shacharit, Mincha, and Mariv. So I said I was going to, come back to this phrase of Shehem Mishtachavim Leheva Avarik Umit Palim El Elo Yoshia, and its controversy. And we'll talk a bit more about it next week. But just to unpack what the controversy is, it's clearly dissing other religions. And during medieval times, it became known that the word varek, the vav, resh, yud, kuf, adds up to, right, the vav is 6, the resh is 200, the yud is 10, and the kuf is 100. That's 316. And Yeshu is yud, shin, and vav, also 316. So this phrase became associated with Jesus, right? And putting down Jesus. And to the extent that varek also means to spit. And so some people would spit at this moment. And even until today, there are some sects that still do that unseemly practice. This is actually a pasuk from, did I put it here? It's next week. This is the Hevel Varik is actually a pasuk from Yeshayahu describing Mitzrayim. So it's clearly was not written in reference to Jesus long before Christianity was even, on the horizon. But it doesn't matter because culturally it became associated when there was a lot of Christian anti-Semitism. It became a way of shtuching them, right? Of saying like they bow down to, nothingness and to emptiness. And so for that reason, there were, it was censored from Sidurim. It was taken out of Sidurim because printing presses wouldn't, post the printing press, they would not allow to print something that was anti-Christian. So in most medieval Sidurim, it's not there. And there are even stories that government officials and church officials would stand by shuls to make sure that this phrase was not being said. Because just because it wasn't printed in the Sidurim doesn't mean that those creative, Jews wouldn't remember it and insert it, ba'al peh, by heart. And so here is one of the fascinating origins of the tune of Aleinu L'Shabeach. It goes back, the tunes for Aleinu L'Shabeach go back to 16th century Prussia, when the Guard made them sing all of Aleinu out loud. Because if they were allowed to say it quietly, how would he know what was and what wasn't being said? So the reason that we have the Aleinu L'Shabeach Lada that we all sing, it was actually forced upon the Jews to ensure that they were not including this phrase to diss Jesus. Wild, huh? So there have been many tunes, composed over time. And the one that we're most familiar with, I think, is about 200-300 years old, and is within this tradition of singing, of having to sing Aleinu out loud. So it's a great question, Carrie, because that's going to take us to our next source of like, how did Aleinu become the sort of mantra or the anthem of anti-Christianity? There are many other verses in the Torah that dispel idolatry, that come into our tefillah, which could have also, become that anthem. So I know I wanted to end by 8:45, but I want to take a few minutes to look at source number 6, which is from the Crusade Chronicles, which was a body of literature that emerged right after the Crusades in the 11th century and the 12th century. They were first-hand reports of what took place, and the survivors wrote about some of these incidences in very gory and personal, ways. So the particular chronicle that I brought here, and I brought you a lot of it, even though it's much longer, is from a crusade and really a sort of pogrom that took place in 1171 in France, when the Jewish community was accused of crucifying a Christian child and using their blood, to make matzah, a classic anti-Semitic kind of trope. And this story here is about what took place with the burning of over 30 men and women in Blois that resulted from this accusation. Just trying to figure out, we'll do a little bit of the story and then we'll wrap up. So if you look on beginning with a paragraph of what shall we say before God, which is the beginning of this account. So these chronicles were very pietistic, and as we'll see here, what shall we say before God? What shall we speak? How can we justify ourselves? God must have found out our iniquity. So it's saying ultimately we deserved what we got, right? Which was a very pietistic kind of way of integrating this suffering into a certain sort of theology. So in the year 4931, evil appeared in France to a great destruction in the city of Blois, in which at the time there lived about 40 Jews. It happened on the evil day, Thursday toward evening, that terror came upon us. A Jew, Isaac Bar Elazar, rode up to water his horse, a common soldier, may he be blotted out. The book of life was, all right, a very also common trup, was also there watering the horse of his master. The Jew bore on his chest an untanned hide, but one of the corners had become loose and was sticking out. Sorry, I was trying to get the right place online here. Okay, but one of the corners had become loose and was sticking out of his coat. When in the gloom, the dark, the soldier's horse saw the white side of the hide. It was frightened and sprang back, and it could not be brought to drink the water. So the Christian, soldier, just to fast forward, thinks that what is this hide? It's the Christian child that had been missing from the town, and he thinks that the Jew before Pesach is throwing the Christian child into the well to somehow use the water, the blood, for the purpose of making matzah. And so the Christian servant reports back to the ruler of the town what had happened, and the ruler wasn't sure what to do because he had no proof about this actual crime. He just had this accusation of the servant, and so he wasn't sure what to do. So they have a little bit of a trial in which the verdict is already set beforehand, and they find the Jews to be guilty of the crime, and they consider receiving a ransom, but the Jewish community from elsewhere doesn't want to pay the ransom to set precedent for the next time. And so instead, the Jewish community is punished by being burned, a horrific punishment. And I'm going to just take us to the last paragraph here, which is where we will come full circle. So on the last page in the source sheet on 4, it's 4 of 12, because I made a source sheet of 12 pages, and hopefully next week we'll do the other 8. But it was also reported in that letter. Again, there was one Jew who escaped, who reported this whole scene and wrote it up in this Crusade Chronicle literature. So it was also reported in that letter that the flames mounted high, that as the flames mounted high, the martyrs began to sing in unison a melody that began softly, but ended with a full voice. the Christian people came and asked us, what kind of song is this? For we have never heard such a sweet melody. We knew it well, for it was the song, Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol. It is incumbent upon us to praise the Lord of all. Right? This is what we're now familiar with in terms of what we say in the Rosh Hashanah Machzor. O daughters of Israel, weep for the 31 souls that were burned for the sanctification of the name, and let your brothers and the entire house of Israel bewail the burning. So Aleinu became an anti-Christian polemic. And it was adopted as a martyr's call, a martyr's anthem, as we see from this story. And because of the suffering that was endured by the Jews at the hands of Christians for so many centuries during the medieval ages, it became lahavdil, like the Ethiopian Jews who sing Hatikva at the end of every tefillah, which is true. When I was in Gondor, they did that. In France, in the 12th century, we have the Machzor Vitri, which is our final source here, saying to us that we should whisper Aleinu, which is interesting, right? Belachash Aleinu l'shabeach, and this is after Shacharit. Okay, so this is the earliest time, the first source that we have for Aleinu not being in the Rosh Hashanah Machzor, but being in the daily tefillah. And this is just a few decades after that firsthand report of the massacre in Blois, where it was used sort of almost in place of the classic Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which we know from Rabbi Akiva when he was being martyred by the Romans, right? That's the martyr's anthem. Aleinu sort of supplanted that in the Crusade chronicles, in the experience of Jewish suffering under Christian hands, because of that allusion to Varek, which became culturally adopted as anti-Christian or anti-Jesus, and puts up the Jewish people. Right? They do garbage, they do trash, they do nothingness. What they do is vain and hollow. What we do is really real. We're praying to the actual God, to the King of Kings. And so I would submit that that is the origin story of Aleinu arriving in our Sidurim. It migrated from the Rosh Hashanah Machzor to the daily Sidur during a time when it was culturally resonant. And we've sort of held on to it, even though it doesn't feel like we need to, end with a bang by putting down the enemies, right? But that's sort of how it became such a rallying cry and why it lasted. And ironically, I think because it was sung and because it was supposed to sort of rise to a certain crescendo with the tune, that's part of its catchiness and part of, I think, why it really, it's cute when the kids, end, tefillah with leading the Aleinu, right? But its origin is very much, if we just understood and appreciated why it came to be in that place and so frequent, we would think very differently about it. All right. So I think it's important for us to appreciate the history of how this became such a prominent tefillah in our Sidur. And hopefully next week we will be able to appreciate the actual substance of the tefillah itself by going through the first and second paragraph, which talk about the uniqueness of our monotheistic worship and how we hope to see the rest of humanity coming to this ethical monotheism, right? There's a sort of a future kind of arc to the Alkein Nakavalacha that we hope that this is what will be in the days to come, which also I think has a particular resonance in our sort of modern age with a certain universalism. But I hope that this adds a bit a more depth to Aleinu at Shacharit tomorrow morning. Okay, so thank you all for joining, for those that were in person. And I see, Janice, that you have your hand up. You want to ask a quick question?
Oh God, just slipped my mind. What I thought Rabbi Akiva said at the end, the Shema. Did you say?
did.
Oh,
Rabbi
that's what you
Akiva
said.
did
He
say the
said.
Shema, but we also know that Rabbi Akiva from the Hechalot literature said, at least potentially, is supposed to have said the Aleinu when he was at the Pardes, right? When he went to see this sort of orchard, transcendent kind of experience with God. So in some ways it's parallel to say, that we take, both of those cues from Rabbi Akiva, which became the two sort of martyr cries in the wake of Christian persecution.
Yeah.
And what is the Rav's full name?
It's just Rav. It's just Reish Vav.
Oh.
It's funny. It didn't become like an introduction, a title until later on. So he was just known as Rav.
Cool.
Yeah.
Whoever he is.
Not-
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's funny, Rabbi Soloveitchik took on that name, the Rav, and, Lubavitcher Rebbe took on the name Rebbe, because in his time it was just understood, who was being referred to.
So it's not Rabbi Meir.
No.
Yeah, I have two questions.
Rebbe is Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, but Rav is an Amora.
Nafon. You said that the Ethiopians say the Aleinu after every tefillah.
No, maybe I misspoke. I meant to say Hatikva after.
Oh, Hatikva.
Yeah, they say Hatikva after every.
No, you said
tefillah.
Hatikva. Yeah.
Yeah, you did say. Yeah. And
I want to let other people go. So Esther, I'm happy to stay on to talk more, but I want to wish a Laila Tov to all those that joined in person. Appreciate your presence, and hopefully we'll continue next week. But I'll wish you a Laila Tov.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Yeah.
Doesn't matter. I'm going to be doing a new source sheet, the 8 through 12, or 5 through 12 for next week. So you can leave them or take them whenever.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you regarding the Hishtachavaya, when the people bow down on Rosh Hashanah and they go to the ground. Is this part of the Aleinu? I don't remember when they say that.
Yes, it is part of the Hishtachava, but we're going to talk about that next week.
Okay.
So of the full prostration and how that's borrowed from the Kohanim in the Avodah on Yom Kippur. That's a very particular reference there of the Hishtachavaya, which is a full body prostration.
And that's for men and women?
Yeah.
Okay. Tov toda rabba.
Okay, bavakasha. Laila tov l'kulam. Thank you everyone for joining. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.